Hey there, explorers! Welcome to QV Uncharted Mysteries, your new gateway to the hidden corners of history, the secrets that refuse to be buried, and the questions that still keep us awake at night. Every week, we dive deep into the world's strangest stories, from sunken cities and ancient maps to lost civilizations and cryptic artifacts waiting to be understood. And share this video with someone who loves a good unsolved mystery as much as you do. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching, for staying curious, and for being part of this growing community of modern-day explorers. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Together, let's uncover the secrets the world left behind. See you in the next mystery only here on QV Uncharted Mysteries. Have you ever wondered? Out there, beyond the burning dunes and the silent stone cliffs, what secrets might be lying dormant, waiting for someone curious enough, someone like you or me, to come along and wake them up? I still remember clearly the first time I heard the name Dead Sea Scrolls. I was just a young archaeology student, huddled in a cold library, my fingers trembling as I flipped through an old yellowed book. There it was, an old black and white photo of wrinkled animal skin, ink smudged, letters fading. The sound of pottery shattering echoed out. And just like that, this boy, an ordinary child, opened a doorway for the world to step into a maze of ancient knowledge that, even now, more than 70 years later, no one has fully explored. Yet I couldn't look away. Goosebumps ran down my back because I knew, hidden in those scraps of parchment were whispers from the past, messages meant for us, more than 2,000 years later. Let me tell you the story if you've never heard the full version. In 1947, on the edge of the Dead Sea, a young shepherd boy threw a rock into a cliffside cave just to chase after a stubborn goat. Inside those scrolls, people found the oldest surviving parts of the Bible we know today. Some passages exactly like the verses you'd read in a church today, but others lines I bet you've never heard before. And more intriguing still are the parts no one has ever been able to read. Faded ink, strange symbols, coded phrases. Have you ever felt that, standing so close to something so old, yet feeling like it's still out of reach? Years ago, I joined a team studying a replica of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I watched experts peer through electron microscopes, scanning parchment fibers thinner than rice paper, hoping just one more letter might appear. And I overheard them whisper, "If we can fully decode this, we might have to rewrite entire chapters of medical history." Why? Because many scholars believe the secretive Essenes, those who hid these scrolls, didn't just copy scripture. They recorded herbal formulas, body-cleansing rituals, maybe even ceremonies they believed could heal the mind to heal the body. The Essenes, wrapped in coarse robes, sitting in silence, heads bowed, carefully dipping red pens into charcoal ink, copying line after line onto fragile animal hide. They believed that if conquerors burned every scroll, these hidden caves would protect the words, waiting for someone to find them again. Maybe they never imagined that someone would be us, living millennia later, still trying to grasp what they left behind. An answer that solves everything, or a new door that opens up 1,000 more questions? Sounds far-fetched? Maybe. But don't forget, many plants once dismissed as folklore were rediscovered centuries later and turned out to be powerful medicine. But I do know this: the human drive to uncover truth can never be buried in the sand. Picture this for me: a cold desert night, wind howling through narrow caves, a flickering oil lamp. I don't know whether those undeciphered lines truly hold secrets of eternal life, or if they're just prayers. If you're watching this right now, maybe you're like me, someone who believes that somewhere beneath that desert dust, there's always something worth finding. So tell me, if one day the entire Dead Sea Scrolls are finally decoded, what do you think we'll discover? I hope that when that day comes, you'll still be here listening along with me. What do you believe? Do you believe that the silent stones lying at the bottom of the Caribbean Sea might be the last bones of a civilization, so ancient, so erased that all we dare call it now is a half-legend, half-theory, Atlantis? When I was still a young archaeologist, I used to think Atlantis was just a bedtime myth, an allegory invented by Plato to teach philosophy. But then one day I stepped into a small research room, and right in front of me glowed sonar scans. faint ghostly patterns appearing from 500 meters deep off the coast of Cuba. You'd see stone steps rising like temple stairs, pathways cracked and twisted by earthquakes or ancient tsunami. But straight lines, sharp angles, perfect rows. These are usually the signature of human hands. I've stood for hours staring at sonar maps that suggest otherwise. I'd strap on a heavy wetsuit, click the regulator into my mouth, sink back down to that silent city, just to listen. To see if that lost civilization, buried under centuries of salt and darkness, is finally ready to whisper its true story to us. Old Eastern maps mention them too. Vast lands that vanished beneath the sea when the Earth's crust shifted and sea levels rose beyond anything ancient people could have imagined. What if we bring up a carved wall, a cracked stone statue, something that cannot be explained away by tectonic plates alone? Are we ready to accept that Atlantis might not be a bedtime story after all? What do you think? I once spoke with a Cuban fisherman whose father pulled up shards of pottery so strange that no expert could match their designs. Not Maya, not Taino, not any known Caribbean culture. Those pieces of memory, were sold to tourists for a few dollars, scattered into private hands, never studied, never kept safe in a museum where they belong. Some scientists have said outright, if there really is a Caribbean Atlantis, it wouldn't just rewrite the history of Central America. It would redraw the entire map of prehistoric human migration. We'd have to ask ourselves, did humans master the oceans much earlier than we think? Did they sail, build, trade, and lose everything long before we ever thought possible? And in that silence, where your own breath bubbles are the only sound, you might find yourself asking, who lived here? And how did they vanish so completely? And you know what? They weren't random. Blocks aligned in rows, steps carved into stone, squares, angles, even shapes that look like broken pyramids, as if someone built a city and then pulled an ocean curtain over it. I want you to picture this. Imagine if you could dive there today, sink down through the crushing weight of hundreds of meters of salt water. Some researchers believe this patch of the Caribbean might not hide just one Atlantis, but fragments of an entire sunken network, the lost continents people once called Mu or Lemuria. Of course, many will say these are just natural rock formations, geological quirks. And yes, nature makes strange shapes. So tell me this, what if one day we dive deeper? If I ever get the chance, I know exactly what I'd do. Have you ever heard that an Egyptian mummy is not just a dried-up body wrapped in linen, but a whisper, a silent promise from a civilization that has haunted our dreams for thousands of years? I still remember the first time I saw a real royal mummy up close, not behind glass in a museum, but lying right there on a preservation table under a pale yellow light in a storage room run by an international team of Egyptologists. But did you know that in recent years archaeologists have started to find mummies with strange holes drilled in their skulls? Holes that don't match the usual brain removal method. The cut is clean, precise, but it's not where they would normally extract the brain. It's right at the crown of the head. The very spot many ancient cultures believed was the gateway through which the soul escapes. The faint smell of chemicals mixed with the damp, dusty scent of ancient earth. And for a moment, I felt as if I was peering through a doorway, touching death, but also touching humankind's ancient ambition to conquer it. There's evidence that ancient Egyptian medicine practiced trepanation, drilling into the skull to treat headaches or seizures, but why do only a few royal mummies bear this mark? What were the priests or physicians trying to do for their kings and queens? We all know the basics of Egyptian mummification, how they pulled out the brain, removed the organs, dried the body with natron salts, wrapped it in countless layers of linen, chanting spells to keep the spirit alive. I want you to imagine this. A tiny piece of bone, no bigger than a coin, carefully drilled with nothing but a bronze tool or a shard of flint. Some experts have asked, could this be the mark of a lost surgical ritual, a way to open the door for a soul to return? I once sat for hours in Cairo, listening to an old archivist whisper about fragments of ancient papyrus, scribbled notes about driving out evil spirits by freeing them through the crown. Could it be that the pharaoh's priests performed these delicate openings, not just for medicine, but for the soul's passage to eternity? Did they know something about the brain, about consciousness, about life after life, that we are only now beginning to rediscover? Not from fear, but from wonder? Because maybe, just maybe, in that small drilled hole, the ancient Egyptians left us a message. Dan T. ever believe you? V understood it all? Ask yourself this. What would make a civilization dare to pierce the skulls of their divine rulers, when death itself was already the final threshold? Yet the deeper we look, the more questions rise to the surface. What will you hear? Surgical ritual, a promise of immortality, or a secret about how humans once dared to reach across the divide between life and death? The last time I rested my gloved hand on that ancient skull, tiny and fragile beneath my palm, I felt goosebumps racing up my arm. Today, CT scans and 3D reconstructions peel away each layer. Ancient skin, hardened veins, delicate bone seams. And maybe, just maybe, one day the person brave enough to find the next one will be you. So imagine this. Someday you find yourself standing in the Valley of the Kings, your hand brushing over a stone inscribed with the trembling script of an embalmer from 3,000 years ago. I believe more skulls lie waiting, their secrets hidden behind those small, perfect circles. Have you ever wondered what drove the Polynesians, small seafaring people on their humble, wooden canoes, to carve and raise enormous stone statues on an isolated speck of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? I'm talking about Easter Island, or, as the people who truly belong to it call it with reverence, Rapa Nui. All around me stood rows of Moai statues, massive faces staring blankly, yet somehow watching the endless horizon where the ocean has no end, only more sky. The first time I set foot here, I felt like I had stepped into a dream made of stone. Did you know? For so long, the world believed the Moai were just stone heads, a few meters tall, scattered lonely across windswept grasslands. But that's only part of the truth, the part you can see. They had no wheels, no metal tools, just ropes made from tree bark, and a kind of patience the modern world can hardly imagine. They stood the statues up, then buried a huge part of each one underground. But why? Years of excavation have revealed that what stands above ground is just the head and shoulders. The rest, the hidden bodies, are buried deep beneath the earth, some stretching 7 or 8 meters down, carved with strange markings no one saw when the statues still stood untouched. I want you to picture this. Hundreds of years ago, the Rapa Nui people dragged these volcanic basalt giants all the way from the crater of Rano Raraku to the island's edge. Some believe it was a sacred ritual, to bind their ancestors to the island's soil, to protect it from evil spirits. Newer research even suggests the carvings hidden beneath the soil are family codes, secret prayers or warnings to guard harvests when the ocean turned angry. He told me a story, passed down from his father, that each Moai once had coral eyes. When the eyes were intact, they watched the sea, keeping the ancestor spirits anchored to the island. When Western explorers arrived, they took the eyes, they toppled the heads, and with them, they took the island's peace too. Once sat by a flickering fire with a Rapa Nui elder. Today, science can scan every statue with lasers, rebuild every burial pit in perfect 3D. But no technology can measure the quiet fear and longing the Rapa Nui left behind in those blank stone stairs. Have you ever felt that? Standing in the ocean wind, surrounded by Moai, lined up like silent guardians, staring into the sockets where the eyes once were, and suddenly wondering, who is really watching whom? Every time I return to Easter Island, I remind myself, maybe deep beneath the soil, beneath the feet of these colossal watchers, stories still lie hidden, stories the waves haven't stolen away yet. If one day you stand here too, I hope you bow your head, place your hand on the cold stone, and maybe, just maybe, you'll hear the whispers of those who built the loneliest wonder on earth. Do you believe that sometimes just a handful of soil dug up by accident can rewrite the entire history we thought we knew by heart? If you're not sure, let me tell you the story of Spomound, one of the most fascinating yet heartbreaking tales I've ever followed. Back in 1933, during the frenzy for gold and ancient relics, a group of treasure hunters in Oklahoma stumbled upon a perfectly round mound of earth, something archaeologists would later name Spomound. What they found underneath wasn't pure gold, but something far rarer. Countless ornaments, strings of freshwater pearls, delicately carved shells, and thin sheets of metal that gleamed with a strange hue, no one could immediately identify. Can you imagine that moment? A civilization once thought primitive people we pictured as river dwellers, hunters, gatherers, yet they left behind traces of a mysterious alloy, forged at temperatures higher than we believed they could ever reach. Some experts say the surface of those metal fragments shows signs of repeated hammering and heat treatment techniques that should have belonged only to Europe or the Middle East during the Bronze Age. But here's the painful part, and anyone who's spent years in archaeology knows this well. When humans dig for treasure, they rarely care that the ground they tear open was once sacred to an entire people. Within weeks, Spomound was torn apart. The strange metal sheets vanished into museum vaults, private collections, or simply disappeared with no record at all. What remains now are only rumors, whispers, that someone once measured impurities in the metal that didn't match any known or source in the Americas. I once sat for hours with a metallurgical archaeologist. He told me that if just one whole fragment had survived, we could have run isotope analysis, traced the ore's origin, maybe even mapped ancient trade routes that connected native tribes with cultures far beyond what we imagine today. But sadly, Spomound now is just a grassy pit, no marker. No sign, as if people would rather forget they ever sold pieces of the past for a handful of dollars. Sometimes I wonder if one day you or I hold in our hands a piece of Spomound's lost alloy. What will we find? A key that unlocks proof of continental trade before Columbus ever touched American shores, or simply a reminder that the past doesn't belong to any one person except those who choose to protect it. Have you ever stood before a rusty scrap of ancient metal and felt your hand tremble? I have. Not because of its price in money, but because I knew I was holding a slice of time itself, a secret buried on purpose, so that curious souls like you and me would have to dig deeper and ask, do we really know these so-called primitive civilizations at all? If Spomound still has a story left to tell, I believe there will always be patient hands ready to dig it up, piece it back together, and share it this time. Not to sell, but to let all of us hear it. And maybe, just maybe, that person could be one of you, watching this video right now. Do you believe that along the long, winding river of human evolution, there were branches that snapped off ancient cousins who never got the chance to become us? And sometimes, all that's left behind is a single skull, lying silent beneath the burning red soil of South Africa. The first time I saw that skull with my own eyes, I swear I held my breath. It wasn't as big as a modern human's, a Homo sapiens skull, but the jaw was massive, the molars thick as pebbles. Proof that it once chewed through things so tough, we'd probably break a tooth just thinking about it. I'm talking about Paranthropus robustus, a name that sounds academic, but I like to call them our giant sleeping siblings. They were once a parallel branch, alongside Homo erectus, the direct ancestor of us. Faint, diluted, but still keeping their survival instinct alive through you. But then they vanished, leaving behind just a handful of bones, a few teeth, a few ash traces of fires that never finished telling their story. And I believe this Paranthropus robustus skull won't rest forever on a museum shelf. It's a clue, a reminder, a challenge to anyone who thinks we've already understood who we are. Trust me, the real answer is never that simple. And who knows, maybe the next question won't come from a lab coat, but from you sitting here, patiently listening to this story with me today. Picture this. More than 2 million years ago in the wild scrublands of Africa, Paranthropus robustus roamed, powerfully built, living off roots, bark, and hard seeds. It's what happened when they extracted a fragment of DNA from inside that ancient skull. Did they cross paths, share food, share blood, leaving behind genetic fingerprints we're only just beginning to glimpse? One drop of enzyme, one chain reaction in a PCR machine, and they could redraw a whole lost chapter of the human story. It's strange, isn't it? Single DNA molecule can raise 100 questions. Did they disappear because the climate turned brutal? Did early humans push them aside? Or did they simply fail to adapt to cold, to hunger, to challenges that our ancestors by luck or design somehow overcame? They found something that doesn't perfectly match any known human branch. A genetic twist, not quite Homo erectus, not exactly the same as the great apes of their age either. And it's like a fossilized glitch, a ghost branch of the human family tree. But what keeps me and the genetic archaeologists I work with awake at night isn't just the teeth. Few brave researchers have dared to ask, could there have been another hominin, still unnamed, living side by side with Paranthropus robustus? I once stood in a lab watching young grad students hold a tiny vial of powdered bone in trembling hands. Have you ever felt that chill placing your hand over a fossil skull? Knowing it has slept for 2 million years, then realizing that somewhere, deep in your own veins, a whisper of their genes might still flow. Today, genetic technology is prying open the locked drawers of the past. Have you ever heard of White Island, that mist-shrouded volcano just off New Zealand's coast? Today, people know it as one of the Pacific's most dangerous adventure spots. But for me, and for many colleagues who've set foot on its ash-gray sands, White Island is not just a smoking crater. It's a natural tomb. A place where countless mysteries of ancient Polynesia still lie hidden beneath layers of sulfur dust and burning ash. I still remember standing there, feeling the ground tremble softly under my boots, heat rising through tiny cracks in the earth. On the surface, all you see is bright yellow sulfur, jagged basalt ridges. But if you listen closely, you might hear the wind whispering through the rocks like voices you can almost understand. And you'd wonder, is that drifting ash just nature's debris, or does it carry the size of rituals we've never dared to fully understand? If you ever set foot on White Island, I hope you close your eyes for a moment just to listen, because maybe, just maybe, you'll hear the volcano that's been sleeping for centuries whisper back to you. Where does the truth of people and gods really hide? The Maori, New Zealand's first people, named it Tapuia Owakari, the volcano that reveals the truth. Did you know the 1914 collapse, when the crater wall gave way and buried a whole team of sulfur miners alive, is just the part that made it into history books? But behind that tragedy, many researchers believe White Island was once a sacred site, where Polynesian chiefs performed ritual offerings, or more precisely, sent soul messengers back to the mountain gods. Some anthropologists have found traces of a flat stone platform near the crater's rim. No one can quite explain why it was built there, balanced on such rough ground. Old Maori legends say that the souls of the departed rise with the hot smoke, carrying prayers for crops and peace to the sky. But look closer at how volcanoes are honored throughout Polynesian culture, from Hawaii to Tonga to Samoa. Volcanoes have always been seen as bridges between the living and the divine. To European prospectors in the early 1900s, White Island was just a sulfur mine. To the people who lived here first, it was the gateway of the soul. Sounds like folklore? Maybe. I once stood at the crater's edge with a local archaeology team, carrying seismic sensors, hoping to find ritual caves buried in the ash. But the volcano kept its secrets, only gave us more ash, the sharp tang of sulfur in the wind, and shards of broken rock stained with memory. Every time I asked Maori elders, do you think there's anything left beneath all this? They just smiled and told me, it's still there, but not everyone gets to see it. Have you ever stood in front of a volcano? You'd feel just how small a human being really is when you face Earth's smoking mouth. One island, one collapse, a few stone foundations, and the scattered fragments of Polynesian memory drifting on sea winds. Have you ever wondered whether some secrets were never buried deep underground, but hidden right in plain sight on old maps we think we've already read cover to cover? I remember once sitting for hours in a damp old archive somewhere in Europe, flipping through goatskin parchment that had turned yellow and brittle with age, the ink bleeding into the fibers after centuries. It started as a small circle of young scholars hungry for the light of knowledge. Their name literally means the enlightened ones. European, Portuguese, Spanish ships slipping through the Atlantic and the Pacific, sketching coastlines, rocky outcrops, coral reefs no one had named yet, and here and there scattered symbols, triangles, an eye inside a circle, sometimes just a lone letter I floating in the middle of the ocean.
Ow.
The lines shaky from a sailor's rough hand, and I couldn't help but wonder, did anyone ever sail right over that tiny mark? Did they see anything down there besides white sand and coral? I still remember the look in a historian friend's eyes when he whispered, if the Illuminati really used the sea to hide a treasure trove of knowledge, maybe we're standing on islands that never made it into any geography book. Some say these were the mapmaker's personal marks, or coded signs for hidden trade routes. But if you know the Illuminati's symbols, you'll spot it instantly. that is staring right back at you from beneath the waves. But maybe those tiny ink dots still sit there, invisible in millions of digital scans, waiting for someone just curious or reckless enough to sail off course, turning the bow of their ship toward an island with no name. Because what they hid was never just gold or silver. It was the spark of curiosity itself, the light they lived for, to make sure that people like us, sitting here right now, never stop asking, is anything ever really as simple as they tell us? But within a few decades, they vanished from official records, leaving behind an avalanche of rumors that they still pull the strings of politics, wealth, and power behind closed doors. They marked hidden safe havens islands where ships could drop anchor in secret, offload gold, coded messages, or forbidden manuscripts the order didn't want falling into the hands of the church or the crown. Some maps even showed dotted lines connecting these strange marks into a kind of ocean network, an invisible grid for moving knowledge, signals, and people back and forth across the Atlantic. Strangely enough, some believe they hid traces of their secrets in the one place no one thought to question: nautical charts. On those 18th century sea charts, you see the usual trade routes, tiny nameless islands, little dots scattered across endless oceans. And among those dots, there were a few marks that I and some old colleagues who've spent years digging into the Illuminati believe were more than just printing errors or a sailor's drunk imagination. You've probably heard the name Illuminati, the secret society that first appeared in 1776 in Bavaria, Germany. Picture this: the 18th century, when the sea was still an uncharted promise. Many conspiracy researchers believe these signs weren't random at all. I once held a map like that myself. The corners frayed, the ink faded to a muddy brown. Have you ever felt that holding a map you thought you knew, only to feel it staring back at you, as if to say, the way was never just a straight line? Today? Yeah. GPS can blanket every ocean on Earth, and if one day you or I ever find it, I think the Illuminati would smile. Do you believe that invisible threads might link ancient Egypt to the distant mud villages of the Dogon people in West Africa, separated by thousands of kilometers of burning desert? When I was a young archaeologist, I used to think that was just myth, a romantic way to see the past. But then one day I stood before the dust-covered reliefs in the temple of Seti I in Abydos, and I realized there are traces you just can't brush aside. The temple of Seti I, built to honor a mighty pharaoh, famous for its rows of massive stone columns carved with tales of gods and kings. But the strangest thing isn't the gods themselves, it's the clusters of tiny symbols, hidden like decorations, that look strikingly similar to the sacred markings the Dogon people use when telling stories about the Sirius star system. Some squiggly lines when compared with Dogon carvings matched in ways that are almost too precise to dismiss. Some historians claim it's just geometric coincidence. Maybe, just maybe, all these secrets are still watching us. Drifting down from the same sky the Dogon and the ancient Egyptians once looked up to, thousands of years ago. But I once asked a Dogon elder, "How did your people know about Sirius B without ever seeing it through a telescope?" He just smiled and said, "Our ancestors were taught by visitors from far away." You see, the Dogon are one of the most enigmatic peoples of Africa for thousands of years. They've described Sirius A, Sirius B, and their orbital dance, knowledge that Western astronomers didn't confirm until the 19th century. We, the ones digging up fragments today, we're just eavesdropping on a story so long that no one alive remembers the whole tale. I once sat beside a linguistics professor, peering at every groove in the temple wall. Did the ancient Egyptians share secret astronomy with traders crossing the Sahara? Or did both cultures inherit knowledge from a source that official history never bothered to record? I can't say for certain, but I believe the stone walls of Seti are still keeping that answer. We just haven't learned how to read the language buried beneath the sands. What haunts me most is this: each tiny mark in the eyes of our ancestors wasn't just knowledge, but a promise to pass it on. If one day you stand inside the temple of Seti I, tilt your head back, let the sunlight filter down through the stone roof, you might feel it too. I still remember the first time I laid eyes on the Piri Reis map. It was tucked away behind a thick glass case, bathed in ultraviolet lights and a silent hum of climate control in a museum in Istanbul. Just a scrap of goatskin, faded ink, coastlines drawn by a trembling hand. It looks so simple at first glance. But look closer, and you'll see a detail that can shake the faith of anyone who believes geography is a puzzle we've already solved. Antarctica, without ice.
Oh.
Others dismiss it as a mistake, a slip of an old cartographer's pen. They charted its edges, passed that knowledge on, through goatskin parchment, carved wood. Hidden scrolls until it finally landed in the hands of an Ottoman admiral staring out at the Atlantic 5 centuries ago. But I once heard a European geologist say the shape of that coastline lines up uncannily well with what modern ground-penetrating radar has revealed. Exactly. How Antarctica would look if the ice were stripped away every map is just a footprint left by curiosity. So ask yourself, if tomorrow the ice melts and beneath Antarctica's frozen shield, we find ruins, foundations, statues, waiting in the cold, would you still call it science fiction? Back in some distant geological age when it was green, raw, and uncovered, Piri Reis, a 16th century Ottoman admiral, claimed he didn't draw it from scratch. He copied it from older sources, ones that have long since vanished. And on that map, right below South America, there's a huge landmass, a coastline so detailed it feels like someone had sailed its edges and sketched it from memory. The problem is, Antarctica wasn't officially discovered by the Western world for nearly 300 more years, and today, its coastline lies hidden under miles of ancient ice. So what did Piri Reis copy? Some scholars say he must have had access to ancient Greek charts, or maybe even maps handed down from a civilization like Atlantis. Can you imagine that? If this is true, it means someone or some forgotten group actually reached Antarctica before it froze over. I stood, staring at that map, for hours. Each quivering ink line seemed to whisper, "No one has ever drawn the whole world." Do you believe that sometimes the greatest secrets don't rest on dry land, but lie still and silent beneath water that looks calm from above? I'm talking about Lake Titicaca, the world's highest navigable lake, perched among the Andes. To the Inca, it was the mythical cradle where the sun god himself was born. But under that mirror of blue water, divers have found things that leave even seasoned archaeologists sitting in silence, staring at each other with more questions than answers. I still remember sitting in a makeshift shelter on the lake's edge, listening to a Bolivian diver whose voice trembled as he told me. When I reached the bottom, I saw stone walls rising straight up, stacked in perfect layers, like the foundation of a temple. The Inca had no diving gear, no modern tools, so how did they build something like this, hidden so far below? Each time the lake stirs, a hidden current shifts the mud, revealing another piece of this drowned foundation. And I know someday, someone will rebuild the lost layout of that sunken city in Andean Atlantis, waiting to be reimagined, stone by stone. Picture this at a depth of nearly 30 meters. Massive stone slabs, perfectly flat, pressed tight together, stretching out like a submerged stone path disappearing into the darkness. Yet the edges fit together so precisely. You'd think a master mason had spent years measuring every joint with a string and a copper hammer. In the murky dive light, those stones line up like ancient sentences waiting to be read, as if murmuring, "We were here once. We believed water was the door back to where we came from." Some say maybe Lake Titicaca wasn't always this deep. Maybe once there was a city, or a sacred temple, swallowed by an earthquake, or a sudden shift in the Earth's crust. But what haunts me even more is the story whispered by Amara, elders around flickering fires, that these stone walls are the gates of the sky, an entryway between the world of the living and the realm of spirits beneath the lake. I've seen some of the slabs that divers have brought up. The outer faces still bear rough chisel marks, even now, beneath the cold silt at the bottom of Lake Titicaca. More walls remain buried, who knows? Maybe someone listening to my voice right now will be the one to touch that final hidden stone. Some mysteries lie on the desert floor dry, scorching, endless, so barren, you'd swear there's nothing left but sand. But for me, sand isn't just dust and dirt. Around 525 BC, Cambyses II sent 50,000 soldiers across the Egyptian desert to crush rebellious priests at the Siwa oasis. They carried horses, weapons, food, water, and then they vanished. It's a blanket of time-hiding stories that, if peeled back, could rewrite everything we think we know about history. I remember imagining 50,000 men caught in a living sandstorm. No time to scream, no way to fight back. You might think of sand as soft, harmless, but to me, it's nature's quietest blade. Let me tell you about the lost army of Cambyses to the mighty Persian king. Every strong windstorm might uncover a bone here, an arrow there, another frozen footprint of a soldier's final march. Not a single spear, not a shred of armor was found for thousands of years. All we had were scraps of ancient texts from Herodotus. A mighty sandstorm swallowed the entire army. That was it. Legend, rumor, wind, and sand. Then, in the early 21st century, a team of Italian archaeologists. I worked alongside them once uncovered a few clues that cracked open the silence. Fragments of bronze armor, human bones, bleached by the sun, pieces of ancient water jars and arrowheads buried deep in Egypt's western sands. Part of that army was real, and it lay scattered like puzzle pieces torn apart by the desert wind. I once held a piece of that bronze armor in my hand, burning hot under the desert sun, no bigger than my palm, battered and edged with a green crust of ancient rust. Today, researchers still believe the rest of Cambyses' lost army is out there somewhere, lying silent beneath meters of shifting dunes. I believe Cambyses' II's secret isn't finished yet. And who knows, one day you might be the one walking across an unmarked dune, only to realize that under your boots lies the last missing piece of a story about 50,000 souls, swallowed by the desert but never truly lost. Have you ever heard the rustling sound of wind weaving through Angkor's ancient forests? I still remember the first time I stepped onto those moss-covered paths, once the beating heart of the mighty Khmer Empire. Most people know Angkor for its sky-piercing temple towers, its stone faces frozen in mysterious smiles. But beneath your feet, hidden under layers of soil and tangled jungle, lies something even greater. An enormous water network. Proof that this civilization understood nature in ways we still struggle to grasp. When satellites first scanned Cambodia's dense forests, researchers discovered thousands of canals, reservoirs, and earth embankments all linked together like the veins of a living city, feeding Angkor's stone temples for centuries. Even now, during heavy rains, the water still runs along channels carved out centuries ago, as if whispering to us. When you listen to the land and the water, they will always protect you in return. How did our ancestors, with no excavators, no digital blueprints, shape reservoirs so vast they still hold water 1,000 years later? This complex hydraulic network began to break down, clogged with silt, broken by invading armies who blocked the canals. When the water could no longer feed the rice, the people were forced to abandon their stone temples and retreat to the plains, leaving the jungle to swallow those smiling statues in green silence. They built towering earth dams, layered flood drains, hidden spillways, and catchment basins, all flowing together like the organs of a living body. This system was bigger than modern London, and so cleverly designed that no monsoon, no drought, could icily defeat Khmer rice fields. I once stood alone on an ancient canal bank, listening to insects buzz and forest birds call, and I couldn't help but wonder. Some historians believe that when the Khmer Empire fell, it wasn't just because of war. Today, archaeologists still camp deep in the Angkor forest for months at a time, tracing ancient canals, mapping old floodgates, feeding the data into computers, hoping to learn exactly how the Khmer once mastered water so well. Come with me across the ocean, all the way to America. Do you believe that long before Columbus set sail, the Norse, the golden-haired Vikings, may have stepped onto this continent and carved their story in stone? The Kensington Runestone in Minnesota is the clue that has kept historians arguing for over a century. Those trembling lines tell a chilling story. A party of 30 Norse explorers venturing into the Great Lakes region only to be ambushed and killed by local tribes. Back in 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman was clearing a tree stump from his field when he unearthed a gray slab, nearly 80 centimeters long, covered in Nordic runes. Some say it was just a prank, a clever fake by Olaf, but many linguists point out that the rune carvings match the 14th century style. It's almost perfectly nearly 200 years before Columbus. And if it really were fake, how could an ordinary farmer know the subtle grammar of Old Norse that even experts debate today? Because when you hold that stone, you feel it. History always has cracks wide enough for the boldest. People to slip through, sailing beyond the edges of known maps, to leave a message carved in stone for us to find. I've stood face to face with the Kensington Runestone myself, those shallow but steady grooves, the crude, honest lines that anyone who's ever studied Norse inscriptions would recognize in an instant. You stand there feeling the wind whistle through Minnesota's prairie grass. You can't help but wonder, did a handful of Vikings really cross an ocean, slip through North America's rivers and lakes, then vanish, leaving only a stone whisper for those who'd come after? No one has ever proven it 100% true, but no one has dared to bury it for good either. Leaving China behind, I want to take you all the way down to Laos, to a place so strange. People simply call it the Plain of Jars. When I first set foot on the Sunken Plateau, the morning mist hung thick over the winding dirt paths. For a moment, I thought I was walking into an abandoned battlefield. But no, scattered across these rolling hills are thousands of giant stone jars, each one sitting silent, unmoving, with no clear story of when or why they were placed here. Each jar weighs several tons, carved from solid granite, sandstone, or sometimes limestone. Some stand taller than a grown person, wide-mouthed, hollow inside. Others claim they were giant fermentation vessels for brewing rice wine used in ancient community rituals. But every excavation so far has only turned up scattered human bones, few charred grains of rice and broken pottery shards, nothing definitive enough to settle the question. Every time a team clears an unexploded bomb safely away, a new jar or two emerges from the red soil as if pieces of the past have been waiting patiently for someone to fit them back together. Sometimes the real mystery isn't what the jars were used for, but why they're still here at all, untouched despite everything humans have thrown at this land. No lids, no engravings, not a single line of text or a carved pattern to hint at who made them or what they were truly for. The mystery is not just in the jars themselves, but in the question, why would ancient people go to such effort to shape these massive stones and scatter them in clusters across this vast plateau? Some believe they were funerary urns, open-air tombs holding cremated remains. I once spent a whole night among the jars, sitting alone as the wind slipped through their hollow mouths, echoing like whispers from centuries ago. And I wondered, maybe the true meaning isn't in their shape at all, but in how the people placed them, guarded them, honored them through thousands of seasons of sun and rain. Today, leftover bombs and mines from past wars still lie hidden around the site, slowing down researchers who want to dig deeper. If you ever get the chance to rest your hand on the cold stone lip of a jar and watch the sunset spill gold across their silent mouths. Now, I want to take you far out to sea, to Oak Island, a tiny scrap of land off the coast of Nova Scotia, Canada. This island has bewitched generations of treasure hunters and even me. It's an archaeologist who doesn't care for gold or silver, but who once stood for hours at the edge of its most famous hole, the Money Pit. For over 200 years since, millionaires, engineers, and archaeologists have poured fortunes and lifetimes into widening that shaft. And what did they find? Timber, clay, bits of rusty chain, scraps of old parchment, but never the legendary treasure they dreamed of. Legend says that at the end of the 18th century, 3 teenagers digging for curiosity's sake struck something strange, a deep shaft, reinforced every few meters with oak planks and carved with mysterious markings near the bottom. 6 men have already given their lives since the first shovelful of dirt, and I believe that hole will go on haunting the curious for generations to come, not because of gold coins or jewels, but because it promises us a glimpse of something hidden, something we crave, to touch a truth left behind in the shadows of seawater and salt mist. When the tide rises, water rushes in and swallows every hope, and sometimes every man who dares to dig. Who could have built such an elaborate flood trap? Some say pirates, some whisper about the Knights Templar, some blame French engineers, and some wonder what if it was all just a coincidence. The most chilling part is the trap itself. Dig deeper than 30 meters and you hit hidden flood tunnels that connect to the sea. I once held a fragment of old paper hauled up from the muddy shaft. The ink faded to ghosts, but a few strange characters remained, hinting that what lies below might be worth far more than gold. Maybe a lost religious text, maybe a royal decree, maybe a political secret that had to be buried deep beneath the Atlantic fog. I've seen those ancient oak planks myself, buried for centuries, yet sturdy as if they still guard a secret. Even today, Oak Island holds tight to its curse. 7 must die before the treasure will reveal itself. To close out this journey, I want you to picture a gray, shifting horizon somewhere off the wild west coast of Ireland. Locals call it Hy-Brasil, the Celtic Little Atlantis. On ancient maps from as far back as the 14th century, Hy-Brasil appears as a perfect circle, boldly labeled Isle of the Blessed. Fishermen from Galway in the 15th century swore they saw it. Shimmering through the coastal fog, a grand stone city rising when the mist parted, vanishing when dawn broke. But I've held those old parchment maps by Ortelius, by Mercator, the legendary cartographers, and I can tell you, they drew Hy-Brasil with utter certainty. Some historians brush it off as confusion with Rockall or an uncharted reef that never stayed above water long enough to claim. Not a speck of land maybe, but a promise that beyond every horizon, something waits for the hearts brave enough to look for it. But when you listen to sailors tell of flickering lights at sea, bells echoing inside a bank of fog, you start to feel it. Some mysteries don't exist to be solved, they exist to keep us sailing, as if someone had truly stood there, sketched its shorelines, then left just enough behind for future dreamers to argue over. English, Portuguese, and French expeditions set sail again and again, chasing that phantom across the Atlantic, only to find endless drifting sea. Many say Hy-Brasil is nothing more than an atmospheric illusion, a fata morgana, a trick of the light and cold ocean air. In old Irish folklore, Hy-Brasil was home to monks or half-divine beings guarding a hidden storehouse of the world's wisdom. I once sat on the bow of a Galway fishing boat, staring into a rolling wall of North Atlantic mist. The wind howling past my ears, and I knew then, Hy-Brasil is still out there.